So this is the Outreach Subcommittee meeting for December 4th, 2018. Members Joanne Fine, Valerie St. John, and Chantel Galloway are present, along with Amanda Bustos and Ed Harness. We're going to go ahead and call this meeting to order. The outreach mission statement is that outreach will promote the mission of the POB and be the bridge for communication within the community. So we are going to move on to item 6 of the agenda, which is the discussion and approval of the CPOA annual report. Did you guys under background, in the second paragraph, that whole second paragraph seemed to talk about semi-annual reports. And then that very last sentence says annual report addressed the period of January 1st through December 31st, 2017. I don't know if that's just because we didn't do semi-annual reports, but it didn't quite fit when I was reading it.
And is that referring to this report we're looking at?
That's what I'm asking. Yeah, that's the question.
So
is that the reason why?
Okay.
Yes.
Should it?
Yes.
It is?
Yes.
What's the value of having that sentence? What would be the negative of taking it out altogether?
To put it in context so that people aren't looking for 2 reports from 2017.
Maybe I would say then just take out annual. This current report or the current report
This
addresses.
Report. How about this report? Addresses.
Yeah, just that way it's not quite highlighting the fact that we didn't do the 2.
Well, I even think that saying the current annual report, it doesn't refer that we're talking about this report we're reading.
So just
if
this
you just
report?
said this report.
Yeah, I'm just not crazy about the way that this sentence reads. When fundamental requests were made, this is under on page 12, policy development and recommendations in 2017. And the second sentence of second paragraph. When fundamental requests were made to Chief Gordon Eden to allow greater access to the APD policy development process, these requests were firmly rejected in a letter written by him dated April 17th, 2017. Maybe in a letter he wrote or a letter he authored something, but a letter written by him just seems a little funky in my head. Also, I wasn't crazy on the next page. In the first paragraph, a little better than halfway down that paragraph, it says, because this training was delayed for new board members, the POB had to make a considerable effort to influence APD to furnish training they themselves had considered important. This activity was not completed until March 2018, when the modified version of the Citizens Police Academy.
It says policy.
Policy?
It says the Citizens Policy Academy.
Oh, good catch. Good catch. Was compressed into 4 days of class time held over 2 consecutive weekends. That kind of seems a little,
well,
like my thumb, my nose,
I think and I think that's related to what you brought up before in terms of the letter from Gordon.
Yeah, it just seems a little.
It is a much better position to be in to say we did what we could, and we found resistance in this by the police department, by the administration, whatever. It really is focused on our behavior, not someone else's behavior, because otherwise it sounds like we're being aggressive to them, and that is not the intent of this. We are describing to the City Council what it is that we achieved, and what barriers or assistance we received in the process. So we're results based on our half, okay? We could say anything that relates to we would have liked to have done more, but we're blocked in this way. As a matter of fact, not a matter of anger or ridicule. And it makes us look small to do otherwise. So I would say that your comment here in paragraph 2, that should be rewritten with that thought in mind. And the same thing is true on this part with the police academy. We've already told them in as many ways as is humanly possible that they screwed up. And that's not the point of this. hitting them over the head with a hammer is not a good idea. It's not in our self-interest to do that. I'm not saying don't put it in there. I'm saying figure out how to say it so that we're focused on what we could get to and where we were barricaded, and not in blaming.
Exactly. That was so much more eloquently put than,
I like that.
than my
You
little
got
note
that?
of it seems a little tattletale-ish.
How do you spell tattletale-ish?
Okay. Just under POB policy recommendations on the next page. If these conditions are not met, all these conditions are not met, I think, comma, all the parties, and then civilian oversight, public, police, public, kind of in parentheses, or somehow other, like, pulled out, become frustrated with the process because it's a little
Well, there's a way to
weird
say
there.
that in a positive. So to say it in a positive is to say this is best practice, as opposed to in other words, when these conditions are met, there's a smoother process, better result. And not everything negative has to be said out loud. And I would just say from the positive when that's not the case. So if you state the positive and then say, when that's not the case, we don't reach the same level of success. So I would say eliminate the negative. Again, I'm not saying don't say it isn't negative. We're affirming the positive.
Right. On that very following paragraph, that the end of the last sentence, beginning with who was not held, I would just chunk from who was not held accountable to the end.
Where are you?
The very next paragraph on that.
Thank you.
We have not forgotten that APD is owner. No, sorry, above that. The formal POB one, that very last sentence.
While this process may be successful.
Experience from previous APD administration suggests that it depends primarily on the chief for acceptance, and I would end it there. I would totally end it there.
Yeah, I don't think there's anybody on the city council or in the public who don't get that that we hit a brick wall. So, saying it out loud seems like a blinding flash at the obvious. And I think when they go low, we go high.
2017 complaint data, there is a reference to 268 cases and 133 cases. I'm sure, and then the graphs don't always or tables meet up to those numbers. I don't understand that. I'm sure that there's a explanation for it, and just probably just terminology that I'm not grasping, but it was unclear to me, so I would imagine it would be unclear to somebody who's not as in the process as we are. So maybe if those numbers are accurate, explaining a little bit what the difference
and say why it doesn't meet the numbers.
Exactly. And I would look at that throughout these tables because I did not go and count up the numbers for each and every one of these tables. So.
Because it's the natural thing that people would do.
That's true.
In reading it is to add it up.
No, that's what I do. I do.
And then on some of these graphs, or some of these, probably, I think it's just the pie charts, if I'm not mistaken. They just don't look like they're completed. They have category name percentage attached to them, so I don't think that we got a final copy of this, or an even close to final
Give me
copy.
an example of what you mean.
This one right here on page 21, this pie chart. On mine, it's figure 5, so probably back this way. And maybe it's just mine the way it printed. See, yours has stuff. Mine doesn't. Mine says category name percentage.
Oh, yeah, I think if it was printed on a bigger
Okay.
page, you'd have it.
So that may not be an issue. On the next page, types of sustained findings by the CPOA, they are called cases in the description for figure 8. They're called cases with the exception of 3 complaints, or 19%, so that probably just needs to be cleaned up.
So let's go back to the pie charts in your first comment about it not adding up. For example, one of the things that in this chart it says is, wait a minute, it says that there were 68 administratively closed cases. That would mean that there were 200 complaints. If we look at this chart, it was on page 13.
Thank you.
So right from the jump, it's 200 complaints and 48 were investigated. Does that mean the remaining 152 are in the process of still being investigated? I don't understand what that means, and then now let's carry the 48 over, so now we have 48 that are investigated complaints. When we go to the pie chart, is that what we're talking about? So it's out of a total of 48 on page 18 or figure 5, whatever the first pie chart is?
Sorry, bear with me while I get back over there
There it is.
on this one.
So it may be that this is out of a total of 48. I still don't know where the other 152 are. And they may be in process. It may be that they crossed over a year or they were counted. I don't know. I'm assuming it has to be counted in this year. I don't know the answer to that question, but it would be the first thing I would ask if I was the city councilor. And so my example on the pie chart, I'm trying to make 2 points here. My example on the pie chart is this is for a total number of how many? And that should relate to this number here, 48, or 200, whatever the number is supposed to be here.
And if it doesn't, an explanation as to
Explanation as to why.
what it is, where they're pulling that stuff.
So a footnote on the chart could say, let's say, for example, the truth is that this represents 48 investigated cases, and that would jive. I mean, that's all you'd have to say is that it relates to that.
Yeah, I'm hoping that's not the case, though, because with 4 investigators, that would mean 1 case a month that's investigated, right? And that's going to be really hard, I think, for City Council to swallow.
Well, we still have to answer the question with
Right.
152.
I'm just saying I hope that's not the case.
So let's start there. Where is the 152?
This is something that I'll have to have the analysts come in and answer for you.
Okay. Are we wanting to do this at the board meeting next week?
Yes, it's going to be on the agenda.
Should we have them there for that? Okay, cool.
And is it true then, Ed, on page 18, where the pie chart is findings for completed investigations into complaint allegations in 2017, is it true that this pie chart relates to 48 investigations? Or you don't know?
48 investigated complaints represent 133 allegations of misconduct. Figure 5 describes a percentage of exonerated, sustained, not sustained, and unfounded.
But the pie chart itself as a whole represents 48?
Or the 133 allegations, or...
It represents 133 allegations.
Okay.
Okay, I missed the allegations part. 133, where is that?
It's in this piece.
Under figure 4,
Yeah.
investigative findings.
So, I mean, obviously we can see that this is a little confusing, just the way that the information is presented.
It says case summary, on page 13 it says case summary and status of all complaints received and complaints investigated in 2017. And it compares them to other years. So it is confusing to me why there's only 48 investigated complaints in 2017. When you look back at 2016, there were 227. What's happening here? And, you know, I don't understand why in 2016 it doesn't add up either.
Yeah.
So it's too confusing, and we can't really have meaningful conversations about the value of this unless we understand the premise by which the math is done. So, I don't know what you want to do about that, but I don't know where 133 comes from when you look at this chart.
Well, and even like to your point, in 2016, there are 198 total complaints received, but 227 investigated. So
It could be, that could make sense if you think 198 new ones were received that year.
but they were pulling over from these
Correct.
from the year before. Okay.
That's possible.
An explanation.
But
would be
it
good.
doesn't explain it.
Yeah. Oh, and the way that this is worded in some of these places, it's like the text is referring to the graph for justification for what's being said. So if you look at this graph, it describes blah, 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 rather than the graph being used to explain the text. It's like reversed. So almost like it's pulling that as a research point, and it's just the way that things are worded. So cleaning up some of that. Yeah, so this was my note. Figures should reference, not justify or sound like they are the source of the info. I had a question on page 37. I think it's figure 32, and the information that's associated with it. Just kind of out of curiosity, how do those numbers compare with the number of call-outs or documented interactions with people? So this one was APD officers involved in complaints in 2017 by Area Command. If the Northeast Area Command has a much higher volume of calls than the Southwest Area Command, I would expect that their number of complaints would be higher, just proportionally. And so I think that's probably a good piece of information to add into this as
Tell
well.
me how you think they're connected, because what I see when I look at this, living in the Northeast, is I think there are people who are empowered to complain.
That may be.
And related to, and as opposed to Southwest, where people feel less empowered, so
Sure.
that may be part of it. So
Relative to how much crime is in that area, there's not a controlling factor as far as that's concerned.
Sure. If you have 100 call-outs, and out of every 100 you have 17 in the Northeast Area Command, right? That's 17% of your population, as opposed to if you're in the Southwest Area Command and you only have 10 call-outs, but you have 5 complaints, then that's 50% of your call-outs that are resulting in complaints that are being filed on the officers. And so is there then a training or a supervisory thing that's not happening in the Southwest Area Command that would allow for 50%?
I understand your point, that
Yeah.
it's a ratio thing you're trying to say compared to how much business you do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
How much of it results in complaints. I just think that, and I understand that logic, but I don't know that the things people complain about are necessarily, a lot of the complaints we get are, you drove fast past me, he was rude to me.
But
as
these are
opposed to-
complaints on the officer, not complaints to APD about, somebody is speeding or my house was broken into or, hey, my brother was just murdered.
okay, okay.
Does that make sense?
Well, I think it's apples and oranges, but I understand your intention. I'm just not sure that these numbers together do that.
And that's what I'm asking for. That's why I'm asking for the flip side of that. How many calls out do they get so that we can see if the Southwest Area Command or the Northwest Area Command is, receiving 85% complaints, then there's probably a problem, even though the Northwest Area Command has more numbers of complaints, the percentage may not match.
Well,
call.
and then think about it this way then, though. There's another way to look at that. Suppose
Okay.
you take a look at the physical space or the number of people who live in the Northwest Area Command. You could compare it to the population. You know what I'm saying?
That's exactly what I'm asking for. That's exactly what I'm asking for.
So I'm just thinking that just because there may be more complaints just because there's more people.
Yeah, no, and I'm not asking about like the number of complaints that are happening. I'm asking about I'm not asking about the number of calls that are generated in a Northwest or in a area command. I'm asking about the number of complaints in relation to the number of calls that are generated. So if, oh goodness, Let me do it this way. So Valley Area and Southwest Area Command, Valley Area has nine complaints on the officers in that area, and the Southwest Area Command has 5. But if they only had 10 calls, right? If they only had 10 calls that ended with a police officer interacting with a civilian, and 9 out of those 10 civilians complain about those police officers, there's probably a problem. And there's probably a bigger problem than if 5 out of 10 people complain about those officers. Am I making sense at all? Mm-hmm. Like, it's just, for every 100 calls, how many are resulting in a complaint? And what, is there a training issue or a supervisory issue? I think those are things that we need to be concerned about as a board, and part of the oversight process.
I see the legitimacy of your thought. I am thinking that the number of adults in the population in that area command would be a better measure. So in other words, is there a disparity between how many complaints are being received? Because I don't see the connection between a call out and necessarily a complaint.
No, I know, but that's all I'm asking about. So I know that like one area of town may have more calls, and I think that where we're not meeting up is with the word complaint, because I'm talking about solely complaints against APD personnel. I'm not talking about a complaint about something that's going on in the community to APD that results in an officer going out. I'm talking about complaints when an officer has gone out against that officer.
And
only
I wonder
that officer.
if that's how we count complaints when we're talking about the total number of complaints, if we make that distinction between is it against an APD employee or not?
Isn't that what this graph represents, or did I completely miss the mark on that? This figure 32.
These are tracking the complaints received by area command as directed by the ordinance.
Against an officer, or are they service calls?
APD personnel.
Okay, APD personnel, so civilian or sworn. But this graph does not reflect the number of calls for service, correct?
Right.
Okay.
What is the value of doing it, comparing it to calls for service? What do you think the value of that is?
I don't know. It's not my argument.
You see, we have a difference of opinion.
I understand that there's it's analyzing it maybe from a customer service standpoint. Is it customer expectation in the Northeast Area Command, or is it call volume that's driving a certain ratio? APD says that they've got a ratio that, based upon calls for service and contacts with the public across the department, there's a certain percentage that force is going to be used. So they're making that argument that that's the level of expectation. So is the level of expectation the same across the city, or is there a correlation, or is there a correlation between the number of complaints and the number of calls for service? And I don't know.
So I think that what we both agree on is this is a number, but it's not compared to anything.
Yeah, it's incomplete.
And so maybe when you talk to your data people, you can help. Maybe we're trying to come up with a solution when in fact we just should pose the question. And so how could we make these number of complaints fit in the context of the work they do? So is there a way to compare that, and what would be the legitimate statistical way to do that?
Yes.
And perhaps the data people can...
That would be a question for them to try and answer. Yes. This is simply what we're tasked to provide.
I just think it would be a more meaningful answer if it was in the context of something. I agree with you.
Yes. I think that's it. I don't think I really spent a whole lot of time looking through meeting dates and stuff like that. I don't know if that's what you had intended for going through this document, but there you have it.
Thank you. Good job.
Thanks.
Ed, I would ask you, and I would ask you too as well, what things do you think are not in this report that could be, besides the things we mentioned here? I mean, we reacted to what was in here, but what about what isn't in here? Is there stuff we should be looking at? Is there stuff that the data people would like us to collect that they see as a gaping hole or a little hole?
I think that Dr. Guerin has some ideas, but we haven't discussed them. He has some ideas for how he would like to change the reports and the reporting, and still maintaining the obligations as set forth under the settlement agreement and the ordinance. But we haven't discussed those specifically.
Okay.
Okay. And so do you feel that this, have you compared this to the ordinance and you feel like everything in the ordinance is answered?
Yes. It's not, it meets the threshold for what we're obligated to report. And so that's the first and the most important criteria, along with making sure that we're getting back on track. You should know that I'll be sending this out to Charles Harrison today because of an IPRA request.
Okay.
With the changes we just talked about, or no?
No, just
Make sure it says
the draft as I discussed it at CRC last week.
Okay.
What would you like to see in this report moving forward? What kind of data would you like to see us collect? And we finally have a somewhat cooperating.
I would leave that to Dr. Guerin and I would leave it to Dr. Guerin and the board's wishes as to how they want to analyze trends and data. That's your purview more per se. I would be interested to hear what he has to say. From my standpoint, just practically, I'd just rather just make sure that we're hitting what we need to for the ordinance and that we're back on track and timely.
It's really important to me that the numbers jive, and so it's important that somebody on staff go over that with the data people to make sure the questions we had are questions that are everyone's going to have, so the math needs to work.
I think that that's certainly a great discussion point for when it's on the agenda for POB.
Okay.
I mean, this is a draft, and it's working toward a final product to get it in, and I think that would be a meaningful discourse along to have analysts there who's pulling the numbers and getting all that information.
The other thought that I have about this is that in the beginning you compare years, but throughout the rest of the report, we don't know that anything that's, let's say, gender or complaints or whatever item you pick, that we don't have a comparison to previous years. And that may be because it's not dramatically different. But in the copy, it should say, this is consistent, in my opinion, it should say. This is consistent with the last 3 years, this is not consistent, whatever it is. And if something jumps out, to show the data from the year in which it's different from this significantly. You know what I'm saying? Does that make sense? So it may be that it's consistent
Right.
year after year, but we
be-
can't tell that.
Yeah, those would be trends that could be questions and things that needed to be analyzed. Is there a spike in complaints against female officers or
Right.
those kinds of things?
I didn't
Is
see
it-
that comparison
Right.
here.
No, I'm saying that.
Like, for
I'm not saying
example-
that was just as an example.
Right. No, and that's what I'm saying. I
Right.
didn't see any places where it said, and maybe it's because there is no dramatic difference.
I'm
But
not sure that I don't think that the question has been asked
okay,
for the report to be that way. We're just laying out the report.
okay. Well, maybe that's a suggestion for the future.
Yeah, we're just laying it out as it's requested under the settlement agreement and the ordinance to provide that data. And I think that those questions are what the board should be looking at. Are we at? Do we have a pattern of officers, P1Cs that are escalating, or is the pattern the same, that it seems to be officers between 3 to 5 or 7 years
Right.
of experience?
And you
Those
actually
kinds of things.
have that data in there, but not trended
Right.
year over year.
Right.
So
Not,
I think that's
it was
Yeah,
this
that's
way.
my
in-
speaking exactly to
It was this way in 2015, it was this way in 2016, it was this way in 2017. Right.
And so your recommendation is on next Thursday, that we say to the analysts, hey, can you give us some comps? Add some comps to this.
If that's what you would like to see, and if it's possible, sure.
Okay. Do you have a sense of what kind of additional delay those questions might bring?
No.
Okay.
They should be able to tell you, though. They know what data they have immediate access to.
Okay. Okay.
Okay.
Do we feel good about this?
I do.
Good to move on? Okay.